Um, Okay, just checking that you can see that okay. Yep. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. We've got a fantastic lineup of terrific people that you're going to listen to, rather than me droning on all night. So you'll enjoy the presentations that are coming up. I'd just like to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land of which we meet today, and respect their culture, land, sea and community. I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present and emerging, and extend a very warm welcome to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that might be joining us today. Australians love to punt. We're the biggest and we wager more gambling than any other country. You can see by these stats that we've got lots and lots of hotels and pubs and clubs, most of which have poker machines and other gambling opportunities within them. Nearly 5,000 lottery outlets, 13 casinos, 2,800 TAB retail outlets, although nowadays a lot of people are doing all of the lottery type gambling through online purchases. You can see Australians lost approximately 25 billion on legal forms of gambling in 2018. It's creeping up every year, of course. In 2021, which was, full COVID stuff, we can see that 287 million was spent on sports betting advertising that year, and you can see what happened to that sports betting increased 67%, which is phenomenal. 2020-21, Victorians lost 5.6 billion to gambling. And just one thing I want you to be aware of at the moment, there are 948 adverts to sports betting daily on free-to-air TV. So we really are in saturation. And just some statistics here that I thought you might be interested in. I'm not going to be on this for very long, but you can see there's a lot of people who are regular gamblers, and of those, the most common gambling product is, of course, the lottery and scratches, and then electronic gaming machines come fast after that. Males are overrepresented, of course. We have a greater number of men that gamble than women, although there are a lot of women that are actually starting to gamble now, particularly over lockdown. We have that money going in different directions according to different status of people, and it's a very tricky area. We know that people who live in low-income households spend on average a greater proportion of their household disposable income, and it can become a real issue, as you can imagine, and I'm sure that you're all hearing a lot about gambling harm that's happening these days. You can see that 1.39 million Australian adults had experienced one or more gambling related problem in 2015. We know that'll be higher now. So why gambling feels more normal? Well, there's far more options now to gamble. There's very great access. You can gamble 365 days of the year, 24/7, anywhere in the world, on any product and any type of activity. So you can easily do it. Everyone's got a handheld device of some description, and that's where people tend to gamble. Greater access, more advertising, as we mentioned before, massive amount of advertising going on. And of course, during particularly the sports betting, the inducements that people are being offered is also encouraging them to bet, and particularly with young men betting with your mates and all those types of things where you're getting a group of lots of testosterone together and competitive natures, and that's encouraging a lot of gambling in our young men. At the moment, the 18 to 25-year-olds are the greatest gambling population in Australia at the moment. The problem is that it's so normal gambling within Australia that there's a great underestimation of the risks associated to it. Okay, the problem is it's not a level playing field, and that's what you're going to be hearing about today. That, you know, a lot of the gambling products, their billions of dollars goes into the research and development of them to make sure that they are addictive, and we know that they are, all of them, and that's one of the problems, that, you know, people are becoming addicted very easily, and young people in particular, with their gaming, and then get transferring themselves into a gambling environment after that. It's not all bad news, though. Gamblers Help have a range of fantastic people that are able to help people that get themselves into difficulties, and that's our information there. I'm not going to dwell on this, but Gamblers Help is where we're from, and we have a fantastic professionals ready to help anyone that does get into difficulties or people affected by somebody else's gambling. So on to our presenters for tonight. We've got Dr. Jim Saar, Dr. Aaron Drummond, Sam McCauley, fantastic speakers. Just remember, please, to keep your microphone off while the presentations are on. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Jim and Aaron to talk to you about their amazing research in this topic. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Yes, I'll now demonstrate my technical ineptitude by failing to share my screen. Let's see how we go. Okay, how are we looking there? Can we see the slides? Wonderful, thank you so much. Thank you very much for that introduction, Penny, and thanks so much for the opportunity to participate tonight. Aaron and I really appreciate being able to come and talk about this area of interest for us. So, I know we don't have tons of time, but we can't in good conscience talk about the things we're going to talk about tonight without acknowledging the help of some very awesome people that we work with, people who have contributed a great deal to our understanding of this topic and to the work that informs our discussion tonight. So here they are on the screen. I won't run through all their names, and we'll also acknowledge the generous funding that we've received from the Marsden Fund in New Zealand to support a lot of the research that we've done. Always like to start off with a little bit of a disclaimer. It's important to note that Aaron and I are both gamers, and we have been gamers for a long, long time. I've got a 9-year-old now, so I don't get to spend as much time gaming or doing anything as I used to, but I still consider myself a gamer. It's still a pastime I get a lot of pleasure from, and in fact, now I spend quite a lot of time playing games with my son. We're also scientists, so we do our very best to take a dispassionate, data-driven and objective approach to understanding issues associated with gaming, but we can't deny that our background and our experiences as gamers contributes to how we view these sorts of issues. That's just a natural byproduct of human cognition, but it's something we need to be honest about. Second thing I want to say is we don't do moral panics. That's not our thing. So we try to avoid sensationalizing issues. We will try to give you what we consider to be a fair and balanced portrayal of the situation. In our time today, we're going to try and talk about loot boxes. Now, this field, since loot boxes sort of sprang to public attention about 5 years ago, research in this field has exploded. And we know quite a lot of things now that we didn't know back then. What we've tried to do is boil that literature down to a few key ideas that we want to try to communicate in the time we have. So we want to explain what a loot box is. We want to talk about why they might be problematic for some gamers. Spoiler alert, it's because they're a lot like gambling. And we want to talk about what parents and guardians can look out for when considering the sorts of in-game reward systems and monetization systems that their young people might encounter while playing video games. So that's the kind of the bare bones approach of what we're going to do. Again, because it's good to start off with some context, gaming is a massive industry. There are literally billions of gamers worldwide, over 420 million of whom are minors, and the revenue that the video gaming industry earns is massive, nearly $200 billion US in 2021. Now, loot box revenue accounts for a substantial chunk of that revenue and is expected to hit around $20 billion annually by 2025. Now, these estimates vary a little bit depending on which sources you take them from, but it's enough to give an impression that video gaming is big business and loot boxes are a big source of revenue for that industry. So now I'm going to hand over to Aaron to talk a little bit more specifically about what loot boxes are.
Thanks, Jim. And to do that, what I want to do is I want to challenge you to a little bit of a thought experiment. I want you to think about maybe a situation where you needed to buy a new black suit. Maybe you've got a big event coming up. Maybe you've been doing a lot of things during the COVID times, and now it's time to move on, and you're going to go and take your black suit and go to an event. And you decide to take yourself off down to the local store in order to do that thing. And by the way, this might show my age a little bit for the references I'm using here. And so you go down to the local store and you there meet the cashier, and you say to the cashier, look, I'd like to buy a brand new black suit. And the cashier says, well, I can't actually sell you a black suit. What I can do is I can sell you this box. And in this box, there might be a black suit. There might be a gray suit. There might be a variety of other clothing related items in that box. But the only way you're going to know what's in that box is if you give me some money and then take the box, and there'll be no refunds for that. And when, of course, you pay the money across, the cashier hands you the box, you open it up and you find inside a dead parrot, which is not particularly useful to you at all. Now, this might seem like an incredibly ridiculous scenario, and it is. But having said that, it is the scenario that many gamers are being faced with on a day-to-day basis with the issue of loot boxes. Jim, if you can put up the next slide for me, please. So what is a loot box? A loot box is a digital container of randomized rewards that occurs in some video games. They're purchasable often for real world money. So we're talking about things that people can actually pay money off their credit card to get. And when you open a loot box, what's inside is going to be determined by chance. You're not going to know what it is before you open the box. You open it up and you will get some sort of reward. Those rewards are going to vary in a number of different ways. They might vary in terms of the value to the player. They might be more useful or less useful. They might be more desirable or less desirable. They might be a particularly rare costume that someone wants their player to wear. They might be a powerful weapon or reward that might improve people's chances in future games. But as I say, the critical issue here is that players are going to pay to access them. And so on principle, obviously, this is a bit of a problem because people don't know what it is that they're purchasing. In many other domains, as the example I gave of the clothing, they would not acknowledge or accept that this would happen in other domains. But for video gamers, this is something that is increasingly normalized, that they're going to be buying things that they don't know what they are. So I'm going to hand back to Jim to talk a little bit about why we think this is a bit of a problem.
Thanks, Aaron. So we think it's a problem because, one, it's a dodgy way to initiate a retail transaction. But more than that, we're concerned, our initial concern about loot boxes was kind of piqued by the fact that they look, at least some of them, quite a lot like conventional forms of gambling. But of course, the thing is, it's not the surface level aesthetics that concern us. It's what's going on under the hood. It's the psychological mechanisms that these types of rewards and monetization systems are playing on. The key thing here is that what loot boxes do is they offer randomized outcomes on what we call a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. So what do we mean by variable ratio reinforcement? Let's start with the basic idea of operant conditioning, which is essentially that reinforcement encourages behavior. If you reward somebody for doing something, they're more likely to do that thing again. And that's pretty intuitive. What's maybe less intuitive, but I think far more interesting and more relevant to loot boxes, is that the most effective way to encourage behavior is not to reward every instance of that behavior, but to deliver rewards on a seemingly random schedule. So this is variable ratio reinforcement. Essentially, desired responses, desired behaviors, are rewarded on a seemingly random schedule. And this means that the person has a sense that a reward is coming if they keep repeating the behavior, but they're never exactly sure when the next reward will be delivered. And this leads to an interesting cognitive reframing, okay, where every time they complete the behavior and don't get a reward, it's almost reframed as a near miss, a near win, because it suggests they've got one step closer to the next time they will be rewarded for the behavior. Now, this type of reinforcement or reward delivery produces what we call rapid acquisition, so quick uptake of behavior, the frequent repetition of behaviors, and it produces behaviors that are resistant to extinction. And that means the behaviors persist even when the rewards become less frequent or stop entirely. Okay. Now, the thing to note, this works on rats or pigeons who press little levers to get food pellets. Okay. It works on thirsty monkeys who do experiments for little sips of juice. And it works on people engaging with poker machines. Okay, it's the same basic psychological mechanism at play, and it's at the foundation of loot boxes, right? Which are reward systems that offer desirable outcomes on these variable ratio or randomized schedules of enforcement in exchange for payment. So, Aaron, back to you.
Yeah, so obviously structurally, these things look a lot like gambling. But also psychologically, a lot of them share overlap with traditional forms of or conventional forms of gambling. And so Griffiths in 95 developed some psychological criteria for distinguishing gambling from other forms of risk-taking behavior. So the first thing you want to do when you're thinking about loot boxes is to see whether or not they meet these criteria. And those criteria are pretty straightforward. The first is you have to have an exchange of money or valuable goods, which of course, if you're buying loot boxes for real world money, you do. If you're going to have an unknown future event determining the exchange. So we can't know what's going to happen when you engage with loot boxes. And again, when these loot boxes contain rewards and you don't know what they are, almost all of them meet that criteria. The third criteria is that chance is going to determine the outcome. And of course, the randomness and that reward schedule that Jim was talking about is certainly present in that kind of most loot boxes do this. The fourth criteria is that you can avoid losses by not playing. So it can't be something that's a mandatory risk to take. It's something that you opt into. And again, with most of these loot boxes, they are supplemental to the game. They're not they're not central and not required. And then the fifth criteria is a little bit tricky and sticky, which is that winners have to gain something at the expense of losers in order for gambling to occur. So it has to be a redistribution of wins and losses. And that's a little tricky to do. And so what we did in our initial cut looking at the issues of loot boxes in 2018 was to take the approach that winners would win something at the expense of losers whenever they got a competitive advantage in future games. So if they got a powerful new weapon or they got something that was going to help them in future games, then we considered that to be a form of winning at the expense of losers. Importantly, that's not the only way you might conceptualize this. There are a few other ways you can think about it, and that might be something to discuss in the question sections a bit later on. Jim, if you could advance the slide for me. So what we've found over the last 5 years are that many loot box systems meet the psychological criteria for gambling. So, you know, initial cut of the landscape, I guess, of all the games that were released on consoles and PCs that contained loot boxes in 2018, roughly 45 to 50% of them met loot box criteria, would meet those psychological criteria for gambling. So that was quite concerning to us. The literature then moved forward a little bit over the subsequent time, and a few other concerning things happened. One, we found that also many loot box systems meet common legal criteria for gambling. So for something to be legally gambling in most jurisdictions, you require 3 things. You've got to have a consideration. Someone's got to put money into this thing. There has to be chance involved, and there has to be some sort of a prize outcome. And with loot boxes, we find that obviously if you can buy them for real world money, there's consideration. Where there is a chance involved with loot boxes, which is almost all of these systems by definition, then they're meeting those criteria. And in many of these systems, they're actually able to be on-sold for real world money or actually have intrinsic value to players, which suggests that they are functioning equivalent to a prize. The other thing that's concerning about this is we know that gamblers are engaging with these loot boxes similarly to the way that they would engage with traditional and conventional forms of gambling. So a meta-analysis by one of our PhD students in New Zealand, Sean Greer, suggests that there's a robust association between problem gambling symptomatology and spending on loot boxes, such that those that have higher problem gambling symptomatology and more symptoms of problem gambling are spending more on these mechanisms than not. Now, we don't know 100% what's going on here. It might be that these things are causing people to become more problem gamblers, or it might be the case that it's just attractive to problem gamblers. But even if that is the case, it's meaning that it's gaining a disproportionate amount of revenue from a vulnerable player base who are vulnerable to problem gambling symptoms. And then finally, the last thing we've kind of learned in recent times is that this is also associated potentially with loot box spending and distress. And so we know there's a bit of a mixed literature developing around this issue at the moment, but our paper suggests that people who purchase loot boxes are also at heightened risk of severe psychological distress, which would typically be associated with anxiety and depression disorders. So
Okay.
I'll hand back to Jim.
Thanks, Eric. So we know that loot boxes share these structural similarities with gambling in terms of the sort of the potent psychological motivational mechanisms that they tap into. And we know that there's a bunch of there's overlap with psychological criteria for gambling, legal criteria for gambling, and we know that people who like to gamble and perhaps at risk of problem gambling are likely to spend more on loot boxes than non-problem gamblers. So this is all converging on the idea that there are clearly some similarities between loot boxes in video games and conventional gambling behavior. One of the questions that's been bubbling along in the background while we've been figuring all this out is whether or not loot boxes might act as a gateway to future gambling. You know, and you'll hear some claims, you know, more sensationalized claims like they're grooming kids to gamble, right? And it's taken us a long time to get data to actually address this question. It's pretty intuitive, you know, that people might think this way, but we didn't have data to actually understand if this is the case. Now we know a little bit. One suggestion early on was that engaging with loot boxes, or essentially small stakes gambling-like decisions and behaviors, might distort people's perceptions of the risks involved in gambling. As Penny said at the start, of that idea of normalizing this behavior. And that might encourage future risk-taking, which in turn might lead to engagement with bona fide forms of gambling. Now, we tested this in an experiment in our lab where we had participants play a game and engage with loot boxes, and then we gave them a controlled risk-taking or behavioral risk-taking task to see if those who engaged with loot boxes were more likely to take risks in the future than those who didn't. In short, we found evidence of no relationship. Okay, our data suggested that engaging with the loot boxes, at least in our study, which was our first study, engaging with loot boxes didn't lead to future risk-taking. And so we thought, well, this is a positive finding. You know, perhaps loot boxes aren't as risky as we thought. And then another study came out, which interviewed essentially, got participants who spend on loot boxes to self-report about their loot box spending behavior, their gambling behavior, and the motivations that led them to these two behaviors. And essentially, these participants reported that engaging with loot boxes was a contributing factor to their decision to engage in gambling behavior. So they felt that starting off with loot boxes was one of the things that kind of nudged them towards these other forms of, or more conventional forms of gambling behavior. Interestingly enough, sometimes it went in the opposite direction, and they noted that, well, they had been gambling and, you know, then they kind of got interested in loot boxes. So in this study, clearly this doesn't show that one thing caused the other. It shows an association, but not a causal relationship. But what it does do is it highlights again the similarities between these two activities, between the people who tend to perhaps over-engage in these activities, okay, and hints again at that those shared psychological motivations that these might satisfy. Then earlier this year, an absolutely fantastic paper came out by Brooks and Clark. This was a longitudinal study where they actually tracked people's behavior over a 6-month period. And the researchers in this paper reported that when looking at the behavior of participants over this 6-month period, loot box engagement early in this period predicted subsequent uptake of conventional gambling activities. So we don't have here an experimental demonstration, but we do have here quite a compelling demonstration that at least for some people, engaging with loot boxes predicted subsequent gambling activity and how much people spent on that subsequent gambling activity. Now, this aspect of the literature is still in its early stages, and there's lots we don't know. Okay, and we need to be very clear that this certainly doesn't suggest that every person, every child who engages with loot boxes is going to go on to gamble. But it does suggest to us that for some people and for some young people, engaging with loot boxes might predict, or it might increase the chance that they later go on to engage in more conventional gambling activity. Again, noting back to the caveat about, no moral panic stuff, just trying to give a sort of a fair appraisal of what the literature is saying. So on a more general level, what does all this mean for people who might be interested in the risks posed to their young people who are engaged in gaming? What should we make of the literature as it stands? Are all rewards bad? Certainly not, and randomized rewards aren't inherently bad either. Okay, variable ratio reinforcement isn't inherently problematic. Lots of learning tools use randomized rewards and variable ratio reinforcement to maintain engagement and promote desirable, positive behaviors. Okay, but if we ask, does this sort of intermittent reinforcement increase behavior? The answer is yes, it does, very, very effectively. Okay, and when we're talking about how that might affect people's behavior and engagement with gambling-like reward mechanisms, this may be problematic for some people in some circumstances. Is it always problematic? Is it always sinister? Again, no, it's not, but it is an effective way of getting people to engage in a behavior. And if that behavior involves separating people from their money, we need to think about the implications, particularly, as I say, for the young people we care for. And finally, I sort of said that we'd close out by highlighting some things that parents and guardians might be on the lookout for. The red flags, as it were, that you might look for when it comes to in-game reward and monetization systems. The most important things to look out for, given what we've been talking about here, are reward systems that require payment for randomized outcomes of varying desirability. So things that create a kind of, oh, I won, I got what I wanted mindset versus, oh, that thing is useless to me, I didn't want that thing, I want the other thing kind of mindset. Now, this is the key mechanism, and this is the ball game. Okay, it doesn't matter what the bells and the whistles look like. It doesn't matter what it's called, whether it's called a loot box or a loot crate or a card pack, or who knows what it will be called in 3 to 4 years' time, or as different legislation comes in to try to limit the access to certain types of mechanisms. Doesn't matter what it's called, doesn't matter what it looks like. The key thing is, does it require you to pay money for a randomized outcome rather than offering you the chance to simply directly purchase the thing you want? Can you buy the black suit, or do you have to risk ending up with a dead parrot? Okay, that's the key issue that we really want to highlight, because there is so much movement in this space, and it's so confusing to know, well, is that thing a loot box or is it not a loot box? In a sense, it doesn't matter. What matters is it tapping into that randomized variable ratio reinforcement in exchange for cash? The other thing we'd highlight, and this is kind of something we're just starting to get into, but I think it's important to note, is when considering the monetization systems that your young people are engaging with, be on the lookout for systems that use either complex virtual currencies or complex conversions. So you want to buy this thing, but you can't buy this thing just with cash. You've got to use cash to buy some virtual currency, and there are 3 different types of virtual currency, and the exchange rate for the cash and the virtual currency are confusing. That's a pretty sure sign that people are trying to make it hard for you to keep track of how much you're spending. Okay, and that's a big red flag. And it's worth bearing in mind that when we combine things like variable ratio reinforcement with things that make it harder to keep track of how much you're spending, we've got a system that is very effective at separating people from their money. And that's something to be on the lookout for. And that's probably, I think, a pretty good spot to end things. I reckon we've managed to stick to time there. So I'll just say thanks again. I don't know if we want to do questions now, wait till the end. I'll leave that to somebody else to decide.
Thank you. I think we're over to Sam now from the Cyber Safety Project. So
Cool.
Thanks very much, Jim and Aaron. Very interesting stuff. Very thought-provoking, that's for sure. Thank you.
Could not agree more. I think the black suit analogy, I have never heard it put that way, but yeah, we never want to end up with a dead parrot, but the dead parrot is the likely outcome. I think is more often than not with these sort of loot boxes. Absolutely thrilled for the opportunity to have a quick sort of 10-15 minutes with everybody this evening, and just obviously there's never the perfect time to do these sessions, so to get alongside Jim and Aaron, and a big thanks to Penny and Sean as well. My name's Sam. I'm from the Cyber Safety Project. I'm a proud educator by trade, and I saw sort of firsthand in the classroom setting for a number of years the impact that technology was having on our young people. The positive impacts, yes, in the classroom, in a balanced, healthy lifestyle, we know how incredible technology can be. But as has been evident in more recent years, the reliance on this technology, how we are all as adults entrenched in the online world, using it to live, to learn, to connect and to play. This online world has very quickly engulfed our young people. And it's something that us as parents and as educators and as guardians, we're having to learn on the go as well, and manage ourselves. So what I'm going to be discussing for the next few minutes is sort of what we're seeing through our informal and formal conversations with young people, what they really want us as adults to know, and also to provide, some of the good things that can come from online gaming when we get it right. And I think the message that Jim and Aaron were so beautifully able to articulate is that this information that we're having a conversation about today with adults is so empowering for young people to actually know and be across, because knowledge is power. And when we pull the curtain back and we become really aware of what these tech giants are up to, we can start to take ownership and say, hey, I'm aware of what you're up to. I can enjoy gaming. I can get the benefits from it, but I'm not going to fall for your tricks per se. So raising a young person today in 2023 online can feel incredibly overwhelming. I mean, the next big game is probably a day and a half away, and your young person's going to be coming to you very soon saying, Mum, can I play Warzone? Mum, everyone at school's playing a Fortnite. Mum, the new edition of Minecraft's out. And all of these games from an adult standpoint are things that we might not be fully across. So from our point of view, we really recommend focusing in on what your children are interested in. And as Jim, sounds like you do, take an active interest in what your young person is doing online, because what that's going to do over time is consolidate a relationship with your child and your students that, hey, Mum and Dad are really interested in what I'm doing online. So when they are exposed to challenges and risks, you are their first port of call. Because to be honest, right now, through some of our research that we do when we survey students working in schools, there's a big disconnect in terms of young people turning to their parents when things are going wrong for them online. That perceived reaction that Mum and Dad and our guardians are going to take our devices off us is stopping them from turning to us when things go wrong. So taking an active interest, talking about your challenges, but celebrating what they're interested in, not poo-pooing it, is a big step forward into fostering that positive relationship with technology. But with that in mind, the games that they're playing, they are so social in nature. I miss the days of just lobbing into the rumpus room and playing Mario Kart for 9 hours on straight, and Mum would know. She'd be completely resigned to the fact that I was safe as houses because I couldn't connect with anybody else. But these games today that we're speaking about are so social. They are essential social networks where we get to play an excellent game alongside connecting with other people. So with that in mind, there are some concerns with what's been discussed already around what the apps and games are doing and how they're engineered to hook you in, keep you in, manipulate your behaviors are very real. So the concerns around excessive screen times, the impact on academic performance and other things that are important in life, the violence and inappropriate content that are embedded within a lot of these games, the obvious safety concerns and unwanted contact that can come from all of these games are very real. And these are the concerns that many, many parents and guardians do have. But I wanted to very quickly mention, we were lucky enough last week with all the primary schools that we worked with, we held a bit of a forum with students. And one of the questions we asked, question 9, I won't forget it, we put up on the screen, what do you wish? What do you wish your mum and dad knew about your online gaming? And I've never seen so much passionate responses. There were things like, can someone please tell my mum and dad that the game cannot be paused, okay? Because saying, sweetie, pause the game, it's time for dinner, is a very boomer thing to say. These games can't be paused. They need to be finished and then maybe finish this next game, this next round, and join us for dinner. Even having their parents aware of the fact that, hey, I'm actually learning things while doing this. And the research says this: communication skills, determination, problem solving skills are all embedded within these games. And this is what these young people were able to articulate. They highlighted as well that it's a great way to escape from the stresses of the everyday world, which was a very articulate answer for a 9-year-old, I thought. And sometimes they're just hanging out online with their friends. This online world that our children are entrenched in is very, very different to what we grew up with. And just going in there, not necessarily playing the game, but communicating and chatting is the new way of hanging out. And then, to sound like a broken record, this young boy said, for someone, please, for the love of God, tell my mum that I cannot pause the game. So we try and obviously laugh at this, but this is getting on the same page of where our children are at within the games that they're playing. So a few other things that we need to address with gaming today is that they have a wide choice of games. It's not just Tetris anymore. It's not just Pac-Man. It's not Mario Kart. There are a plethora of different online games for whatever your heart desires. As I mentioned, so many of these online games as well are social in nature. But it's also interesting to note that the average age of an online gamer is 34 years young. And often we think of gaming as a very junior activity, but it's the furthest thing from the truth. So if we are giving our young person free reign of a game that is social, there's a likelihood that they can connect, communicate, and talk with people that are older than them. There is at times unregulated advertising within the games, but also across streaming platforms that they might be encouraged to also attend as well. And the statistics within the games are king. You'll see a lot of these popular games advertising double XP at various points in the day, getting you back in the game when they want to reward you, because those statistics equate to status, and status has real credit in the playground. Players also and people have the ability to chat and connect with you if settings in particular haven't been utilized. And the short time investments are a very interesting thing to consider. I'd like to think of myself as a self-regulating 34-year-old, but like Jim and Aaron, I'm an avid gamer myself, and I have found myself playing Fortnite thinking, just one more. Didn't go to plan that round, just one more. And this short time investment is no accident. Why would they make a round last 30 minutes when they can shorten it and the likelihood of you playing and playing again is ultimately there? So this is where setting boundaries and perimeters can be very, very helpful. We also know that games extend beyond the four walls of the house, and games can leave via mobile-enabled games as well. And you will be encouraged to return daily and return regularly through how the games have been manipulated and engineered as well. And to sound like a broken record, I told the kids I was running this session last week, and they were like, tell them we can't pause the game. So with all of these things in mind, we know firsthand that the games that they love to play certainly have a lot of positives, and we're going to highlight that in just a few moments' time. But our digital habit report that we conducted last year when we worked with a lot of secondary school students highlighted a few things. A lot of them are playing online games, no surprise. Somewhat concerningly is that a lot of them are connecting with people multiple times that they first met from within the game. Now, from where we stand at the Cyber Safety Project, as somebody that works closely with the eSafety Commissioner, they tell us pretty loud and clear that anything that's popular online with young people is also popular with people with malintent. It's a frustrating thought. It's a disgusting thought. It's an annoying thought. But letting our young people connect with individuals within online games that are popular with young people, we need to just have that in the back of our mind. Students also highlighted and suggested they were very concerned about how others behave within that game, behind a screen, behind a username, behind a profile that they can ultimately hide behind. And even 16% were made to feel uncomfortable. But it's no surprise there that you can see a lot of them were playing for multiple hours per week. The last statistic that I want to share with you from our Digital Habit Survey report, and this is on our website, you can check out the results in more depth, is that a lot of them were freely able to admit that they are finding it very, very hard to get off their devices when playing online games. And as has been touched on earlier in the session, how these games are rewarding us whenever they want to is conditioning this behavior, having us go back for more and more, having us say, I didn't go that way, that supply chest didn't have the items I needed, I'll play just one more. And this is happening right in front of our eyes. So yes, knowing this is important, but helping our young people consider this and what to do next is our role as parents and guardians. Now, I think it's very important to know that there is plenty to love about online gaming when we get it right, when we're getting enough sleep, when we are exercising, when we are having that offline social connection. And there's research screaming at us that says gaming in that balanced lifestyle promotes teamwork, promotes leadership skills, provides a sense of community, relationships, problem-solving skills. These are all the things that I think we want our young people developing in a digital age through digital assets that they're very interested in. But with that in mind, there are obviously concerns that do come from gaming. And it's no secret that the harmful content in a lot of the violent games is very evident. Our recommendation in terms of parenting and parenting young people that do enjoy games is to stick to the Australian classification standards. They're there and they're there for a reason. And so many of these games do have a violent nature where the goal is to kill everybody else on the map and be the last one standing. We know that the unwanted contact is there. Unfortunately, there's stories after stories, and one unfortunately happened to one of my students during my first year of teaching, of playing a game, connecting with somebody that said they were their age, but turns out they were a lot older. So managing that contact can be done. The games themselves have copious amounts of settings that can minimize the exposure to people that they don't know, where you can only play with people that you have friended. But we need to get in that habit of setting that up and getting our young people to take responsibility of that themselves and not always being over their shoulder doing it for them. As I mentioned, statistics are king, status is king, how you look is absolutely king. And to be honest, I don't spend much in these online games. I'm not bothered by how I look, but do I certainly cop it by some of the people that I play with as well, getting called a noob, being shamed within the game because of how I look, and even some of my levels and standings. As has been so beautifully mentioned today, the links between online gaming and gambling are there, and the research that is happening throughout the years and is happening at the University of Tasmania is just highlighting some of the things that we need to be across. And often the questions are asked, how on earth are these gaming developers getting away with it? Why are they allowed to do it? And there is huge question marks over some of these behaviors, and the legislation that's hopefully going to come in and the changes that are going to be made, hopefully is going to happen in our lifetime and sooner rather than later. The negative comments, I know firsthand playing these games, talking to young people, it's just a part of these games, and the exposure, whether it be written or verbal, is very much there. And then the violence as well is just something that is a part of so many of the online games, whether it be Minecraft, kill him, kill him, kill him, whether it be in Roblox, whether it be in Fortnite or Call of Duty. It is a conversation that we probably need to start having around the desensitization to what our children are being exposed to in these shoot 'em up, be the last one standing, kill 'em all games. Now, from a safety standpoint, this is one of my favorite sort of digital literacy skills that it really helps young people, adults, parents, guardians understand where they are when they're playing online games or whenever they're doing anything online. And it's got to do with the personal, private, and public spaces. Now, this is a basic concept at the end of the day, but it's just being able to label whatever we're doing online as one of these three spaces. So personal is just you. Nobody else is in there. You look around and you are the only person in that world, in that online bank account. You're not going to let anybody into that personal space. It's just for you. In that Minecraft world, then you've been building for years that nobody's ever seen. That's a personal space. Private spaces we can set up where we send codes, we invite people, people request, and we allow them in. We're controlling who's in that game with us. A great little safety strategy to have in place whereby, yes, you can start playing Minecraft, but I want you just playing with people you know from school. This can be done. We can set this up. And then ultimately public games, public spaces. Anybody can join. I've jumped into Warzone and none of my friends are online. Fill my team with people that are in the same spot, and I can start playing almost publicly with people I don't know. Labeling where we are changes what we should be doing. Do we have chat feature turned off in public games? Do we have chat feature turned on when we're playing privately with our friends? These are all questions we can and things that we can do and set up when we know where we are very quickly. Now, back in my day, as I mentioned earlier, it was simple. Plug in the Nintendo 64. There was no access to the internet, and I could play away. It was just me against the computer. If I had a friend over, I guess it would technically be considered a private space because we had multiple controllers in the same console, but never was it public. We didn't have access to public games because there was no access to playing with people we didn't know because the internet wasn't around. But now it's very, very different. You purchase games, you download games, you go online and you play them, and you have the ability to play publicly. Now, with that in mind, that changes how we should be setting these things up for our young people and helping them understand that it's okay to play Rocket League. It's, I mean, the most ridiculous concept, cars flying around playing soccer, but incredibly fun. And we can play it safely by setting it up and turning off voice chat. We can do so in Minecraft the same way, joining public realms that are so complex and impressive that you almost have to go and check them out. But how can you be there safely? Well, we could change a few settings and set them up so that, hey, you can go and play Minecraft privately with your 6 best friends from school. We can allow the chat feature to be turned on and you can socialize and hang out. Or you can build up that Minecraft world purely on your own and you can build and create and nobody's ever going to see that. Just by labeling where we are, knowing where we are, and understanding that we can actually control these different spaces within the settings is so important to consider. And it's very impressive to know that young people are almost well across this concept without actually having it been explicitly told to them. Now, from a lived experience, from a game standpoint that I'm sure many of your children or your students would be really infatuated with is Roblox. Now, this is often referred to as a game. I want to go and play Roblox, what a great game, but it almost needs to be referred to as a platform. Because as a Roblox user, you can almost do 2 different things on there. I can load in to my Roblox profile right now, and I can go and explore games and worlds and creations of other Roblox users. It is a user-generated platform, meaning that Roblox relies on users to create things that other users can go and experience. Now, anytime we associate user-generated platform with anything online, we need to have our wits about us because users around the world are going to create things that shouldn't be there. If we give our young people free reign of this platform, loading into any world that's been built by any other Roblox user, there may be worlds that exist that they shouldn't see. Now, the frustrating thing is these are, honestly, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. This particular game no longer exists. It was called Meep City. You load it in, 80% of it was cute unicorns, fluffy clouds, seemed harmless. Other players that had loaded in there were there as well. But when you entered one particular doorway, sexually explicit noises came through the headphones or the speakers. And as you can see from the walls here, there were some rather crude acts being requested of the game players themselves. Now, yes, it was reported. Yes, it was taken down. But Roblox as a game, as a platform, being a user-generated platform means that users with malintent, given the fact that it's popular with young people, sounding like a broken record, means that it is popular with those people that shouldn't be there, will continue to create this content that is up there for 4 hours, 5 hours, 12 hours, and young people are being exposed to this. Now, Roblox as a platform, again, moves with popular culture. The explosion of Squid Game a few years ago did not take too long for a Squid Game edition on Roblox to land. Now, you think about the violence within that game, it was also there. So these platforms and what our young people are being exposed to can and is within our control as parents. And I've put 15 minutes up on here, but that is being generous. To the game's credit, in terms of platforms and what their expectations are on them, they need to be creating a safe, they need to be seen to be creating a safe platform for their users. And they do ban users. They respond to reports being made by the users within the gameplay. But there's also so much that we can control within the settings ourselves as well. Now, I'm not too sure of the sort of age demographic of parents on the session this evening, but a bit of advice that we often give is when setting up profiles for your children, don't view it as your profile. Don't think this is my device, this is my game, I'm in control of when you play. We suggest setting up the account for the youngest user in your family and putting their year of birth in the sign up page, because what that's going to automatically do is understand that, okay, this user is 6. This user is 7, this user is 9, and various settings are going to be automatically turned on and off by the age of the user, or obviously what their Roblox thinks that user is, how old they are, and change various settings by default. But it honestly could not be simpler. And this is just a habit that we need to get into. Talking to some year 5s today, they often articulate how excited they are when mum and dad say, you can play Among Us. Yes, you can play Fortnite. And the settings are the furthest thing from their mind. but it doesn't take long to set them up for our success and our safety. If you look at some of the default settings, often it's going to mean people you don't know can message you. You can join any worlds, chat features are turned on, and all of these are so easily controlled, and they're more comprehensive than they were when this type of thing was first introduced. So, tip for the day, and hopefully it's something that you are considering more and more, is to get into those settings the second that you allow your child to use something different. I said 15 minutes, but that is being overly generous. And you will be staggered. You'll be staggered to hear what your children actually know about safety settings and what they should be set up as. But it's just not something they're prioritizing because they aren't aware of those risk factors that we've been talking about for the last few minutes. So to lean back on what the real theme of today's session is around what are our children playing? What are they being exposed to within these games? And to hear Jim and Aaron talk about the loot box systems that exist in so many different games, they look very, very different. And I wish I had my sound turned on for this, but this is essentially a supply chest in the game Fortnite. As was mentioned, it glows beautifully. I mean, if you had to say, what does this look like? It looks like hot chilies down at my local RSL. The pokey machine. It makes the most glorious sound in the game of Fortnite. And the weird thing is, and again, it's no accident, you hear it before you see it. It gets louder and louder the closer you get to it. You're kind of looking for it because you know in this supply chest that there's something good, hopefully. Now, when you go to open these chests in Fortnite or in Warzone or in many of these games, why don't they just open? When I hit square on my PlayStation control, I expect this just to open, but it actually takes a fraction of a second to open, about half a second. Now it's 2023. Why doesn't this just open? Well, you think about how this has been engineered. You think about what Jim and Aaron were touching on. These are all things that the game developers are doing to have us cross our fingers and toes and say, please be a legendary gun, please be a legendary gun, please be a legendary gun. And when it's not, when it's a common item that you kind of expected, you're somewhat disappointed. You try and survive, you come across another one. There it is. I hear it before I see it. Hold the square button down on my PlayStation controller. And when a rare gun, when an epic gun, when a legendary gun does appear, which is unlikely, I mean, you can probably tell, you feel amazing. You're like, finally, I'm a huge chance of winning this round. Now, none of this is an accident. Everything is there for a reason. The slight delay, the delayed response reward, the operant conditioning, all of this is conditioning our behavior to reward us whenever the game wants to. And that hit of dopamine, that feeling, is, again, the game drip feeding it whenever it wants. But it's not just happening in the big players. I mean, if you look at the App Store right now, 12 of the top 15 have in-app purchases in them. Meaning I could go and download those 12 games for free. I'm not going to spend a cent. I'm going to be exposed to a lot of the features where the game is maybe rewarding me when it wants. Operant conditioning, as was touched on earlier. And then I'm going to get to level 276. And I've been exposed to a lot of those features that are drawing me back in and in and in. And I want to keep going. I want to proceed. Now, my mum hates me telling this story, but when she got to level 276 on Candy Crush, she embarrassingly spent more than she probably would have as a self-regulating adult on jewels to progress. Now, again, no accident. Exposure, 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 exposure for free, and we'll get a microtransaction down the line. Now, if you look at some of this, it's almost ancient data now of revenue from microtransactions. It highlights that it is big, big business. Now, the most recent research I can find on this in 2020 saw a massive jump. This graph was across the board in 2014, 2013, 2012. This is in the gaming developers themselves. With NetEase Games revenue jumping to 5.2 billion. So it's big business, and conditioning the game player's behavior to engage in a microtransaction is clearly working. So the games are keeping us playing through so many different ways, drip feeding us that dopamine whenever it wants, having us ask questions of what's coming next, trying to get us to answer those questions. But it all does come back down to operant conditioning. And what I think is really powerful is, again, having a great turnout tonight, is actually opening the door and pulling the curtain back to your children to say, is this a game you play? Do you know the game is doing this? This is a bit of an exercise. I want everybody to see if you can pinpoint the moment that this streamer receives that wonderful hit of dopamine that EA Sports has drip fed him.
خي صافي سالينا دراري ستوب الوليد
That is a loot box. This gentleman was unpacking a player in FIFA Ultimate Team. He didn't know what he was going to get. He was probably expecting somebody common, somebody not so great. But when he did receive that rare player, that was the game, once again, drip feeding that experience whenever they wanted to have us come back. And there are the incredibly clear links between gambling and gaming that are within so many of the really, really popular games. Now, if you are somewhat concerned following the sort of session today, thinking, okay, these games are conditioning our behavior, they're drawing us back in, there's clear links to gambling that are within the games that my child wants to play. We often get asked, what does an appropriate amount of screen time sort of look like? How much time should my child be gaming? And to be honest, there's research out there that's going to give you the answer you kind of want to hear. But our question back is, are your children just consuming game after game after game, maybe watching video after video after video? Or are they being given the opportunity to be creative in a space that they are clearly loving? Because in this online gaming space, there are so many opportunities to develop a skill set around coding in the games that they do love to play. I mean, one example of hundreds is makecode.org, okay? A great place to go that actually can link to Minecraft Education Edition, where you can test certain things out around coding, around different formulas, around different behaviors within makecode.org to then test them out in Minecraft Education Edition. Could not be simpler to start with. A great sort of family exercise to do alongside your child that they're clearly interested in developing and showing that interest that you have with them as well to develop that relationship. Because as I mentioned earlier, the disconnect between young people and their parents and guardians right now is there. It's what they tell us every single day. They're worried about how they were going to react. They're worried about being patronized or punished. So normalizing and almost encouraging their passions is going to develop that relationship that we do really need.
But Sam, we're really going to have to close off quick soon.
So to finish off with, if anybody's looking for more resources, we blog very regularly on our website. Another great place to go to is the eSafety Commissioner. They have a wonderful, wonderful eSafety guide around games and apps that you might use or your children might use and you want to know more about with easy to digest information. But if I am completely honest, this is my one-stop shop. When my ears prick up, I head to Common Sense Media and find out what they've got around the app and game itself. There's age recommendations from parents and guardians as well. I will just hand back to Penny. Apologies for going a few minutes over, but to get the opportunity to talk alongside Jim and Aaron and the incredible research that they've sort of done, I'm certainly going to keep my finger on the pulse of what you guys are doing in the future. But Penny, I think it's time for Q&A if I'm not wrong.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everyone. That's so interesting. Now, we'd love our audience here to now quiz these amazing presenters. So feel free, please, to put any messages in the chat. But if you want to put your hand up now, I'm sure that we can take some messages from the floor too. So if you want to turn on your videos and unmute, and we'll ask some questions there. Feel free.
Penny, did you want to stop recording?
Great opportunity. Yeah, we'll stop recording now too.